Happy Thursday, everybody. I hope you had a good, very confusing. Eddie just asked, when's the first paper going to be sent out? It's going to be sent out early next week. Probably Tuesday, I'm going to post it. So yeah, this is a really good transition into business stuff. So first off, as you all know, today is Thursday, which means that it's not Tuesday. But because of this, our schedule is a little bit off. I will email out about this, but basically the way this is going to work is today we are going to talk more fodder, and then Tuesday we're going to talk even more fodder. So on Tuesday, the only thing you have to read is the language of thought thing that was assigned for like 2 classes ago. That's all we're reading. I will email out about it again, but there's the how to write a paper class. I realize that usually that section is just me. I do a lot of talking and it's not very back and forth. So I'm just gonna like record that one and put it on, post it to the YouTube. And then if anyone has any questions about writing papers, be they practical or more theoretical, shoot me an email. I will then send out the answer to the entire class because I'm sure you won't be the only one with that question because I'll inevitably forget something. Papers are probably, well, I haven't decided yet. It'll probably be in like the 4 or 5 page total range. I'm not looking for anything giant. And I will talk about this more, but basically I'm happy to read over paper drafts up until a couple days before they're due. And so I'll send all this out in an email and I'll talk about it more next week. But basically, you've got a couple weeks to work on the paper. You can email me with any questions, comments, concerns, drafts, anything. And that's how that'll go. So for next class, if you've already done every bit of the fodder reading, so the, I guess they're number 6 and 7. I think it's 6 and 7, or is it 5 and 6? 6 and 7. If you've already read those, you don't have any new readings. The number 8, the prior reading, is just to go along with the how to write a philosophy paper lecture I will be posting to the YouTube on Thursday. So we are back to Tuesday starting next week. Also, the other thing is Zoom has changed its rules. We now need a password. So to get into this class, or the link is still going to be the same as it's been for the past few classes. The Tuesday link will be the same, but there's now a password, and the password I think is just phi-sci, all lowercase. It's posted to the Blackboard, but if you want to write it down now, it's just PHIPSY, all lowercase, for the new Zoom password, and I'll email everyone a reminder of that as well when I send out other business information. Any questions, comments, concerns, feelings? We're all doing okay? All right, awesome. So the plan for today is just to pick up where we finished off last time. So like usual, I'm just going to review a little bit of what we said last time. Then we're going to jump into the next bit of that fodder reading. And today's stuff is really kind of the core of everything else that's happening in this semester. It's really the ideas that our first few classes were arguing against, and really is kind of the background that every, cognitive scientist and most psychologists kind of take for given and then build up their work on. So it's really kind of a substantive, meaty part. So I'm going to kind of take our time today. I'm going to try to make it a little more interactive so we have a bit more of like grappling with the issues instead of me just lecturing. But it's also just, it's just an interesting topic of how somebody can take ordinary common sense and turn it into science. Because at the end of the day, most psychologists think that what they're doing is they are taking common sense and just making it a scientific study. They are just adding scientific rigor and labs and a better way of finding out the truth. So what we're kind of going to do today is just put in place all the background that when psychologists do this, what is it that they're taking for granted? What's in the background of this? And this is kind of what we've been building to through the first few classes. So a lot of this is just going to be a lot of common sense stuff with some philosophy thrown in. So just to review though, we said last time that Jerry Fodor's idea was that we need common sense psychology, and we need it because we shouldn't throw it out. So behaviorists and eliminativists, I can never say that word, think we should throw it out. He says, no, that's wrong. And he came up with 3 reasons to think that it's wrong. And this is all we talked about last time. So review time, let's test whose brains and memories are working. / I need a drink of water. What were his 3 reasons to think that we shouldn't throw out folk psychology, that folk psychology is a good starting point to think about why humans do what they do and how the human mind works? You can type it in the chat or shout it out loud or anything. I'm just going to put up 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, Ray's right. The first one is it works. And not only does it works really, really well. So Fodor's first explanation was that our ordinary belief, desire, folk psychology of explaining why people do things. If I want to know, why did Ray type in this box, it works, I'm not going to give an explanation like, well, there was some firing in this type of part of the brain, and that was correlated with a particular movement in the finger. It'd be something like, he believes that one of the answers is it works. And the fact that I describe things in terms of beliefs and desires and memories, that's a sign that folk psychology is onto something. And not only does it work on a simple case like this, if I want to explain why a certain person committed a terrorist act, or why some ancient historical figure went to this place at this time, I'm going to want to explain it in terms of beliefs and desires and what their intentions were. So the first thing is, it works really well. And so again, we're just saying, why does he say that folk psychology is good? Why should we keep it around? What was the second or third reason? Any takers? All right, the second one I'll give you. The second one was that it's quite deep and complicated. So one of the things that a good scientific theory generally does is it doesn't just explain things at the surface level. Like, here's bad physics. Why does the marker fall? It likes to, or it likes falling, or it's full of fallingness. It's like, that's not a good theory. A good theory is one that explains why this falls in the same terms or using the same descriptions as we explain lots of other things. So the great breakthrough of Newton was that you can explain why this marker falls in the same way that you explain why the planets rotate as they do, why the sun is the center of the galaxy, and all these other things. It's all one big explanation. So Fodor says it's the same thing with folk psychology. You explain so many different behaviors, but it's not just like, if you desire this, you do this. It's rather that if you want to go to the store and you believe that you can get there by foot, and you don't think there's anywhere where you have to be this afternoon, and you really have the right shoes on for it, like, all that stuff works together. So he's saying that when somebody like the Churchlands say folk psychology is simple, it's boring, there's nothing really it's explaining, he comes back and says, no, it's actually really quite a complicated theory. It's worth taking it seriously. And then this was the third one. Let's see if I can bring this out. What are some of the things you want to explain in psychology? And this is like a flat-footed, simple, I feel like listening to a voice other than my own sort of question. What is the point? What are we trying to do? Or just an example of the sort of thing a psychologist might want to explain.
Maybe find out why someone murdered somebody.
That's a really good one, is find out why someone murdered somebody. And so other sorts of ones are like why someone like shot up a high school. All of these are the sorts of things that you want to explain. And this was our last point at the end. Fodor argues that if that is what you're trying to explain, that is by its very nature a mental sort of activity. Because you cannot explain what it is to murder somebody in purely behavioristic terms or in purely brain state terms. Because if you talk about it in terms of brain states, like, what's the difference between self-defense and murder? It seems like you can't explain the difference there. Like, we want to explain why someone murdered somebody. But if you are acting in self-defense, it might be the exact same physical activities. If somebody comes at me, like if somebody's standing there and I go like this, my brain will be in the exact same state, regardless of whether I'm trying to act in defense or whether I'm trying to murder them. So if we're trying to explain why did a person murder this person, then it seems like what we're trying to do is explain something that's by its very nature psychological. If you explain, like, to tell me that to murder someone is to be in this brain state and have this firing at the same time as this part of the motor cortex fired, while this belief was like this part of the brain, which is correlated with a whatever. That's not going to tell you the difference between why this person, like that's not going to be able to differentiate between a murder and a self-defense. Or even like, if you look at just my motor cortex, me holding this marker right now and going like this is going to be indistinguishable from if I had an actual knife and were actually stabbing somebody. So the ideas that Fodor's pointing to is that if you actually want to explain what it is psychologists want to explain, you have to take psychology for granted at the outset, because you can't even describe the thing that you want to get an explanation of. So as he puts it, it's indispensable. Folk psychological ideas are indispensable. You can't even ask the questions you want to ask unless you first assume that folk psychology is right. So, oh, I need to plug in my computer. Give me 1 second. It's the one problem with having too many screens is sometimes you forget to plug some of them in. All right. Once we accept with Fodor that folk psychology is a good thing, we should accept folk psychology. What's a question that comes up? If I tell you I believe in folk psychology, I believe it works, what's a question you might have at this point? We're now moving from the review to the stuff we talked about for this class. All right, let's go with an analogy to kind of bring it out. Imagine you and I are talking and I tell you I believe in God. What's a question that might come up at this point?
Why do you believe in God?
Why do I believe in God is one. But what's another question you might have, even more fundamentally?
How could he prove God's existence?
How could I prove God's existence, or raise question of which one? Say we're talking, I tell you I believe in God, and we get to talking, I'm like, yeah, he lives in my backyard. He looks something like this, actually. I can't always tell him apart from all the other ones that live in my backyard. He's got like a little hard top. It's either a Pokemon or it's a turtle. Either way, if you found out that this whole time I was talking about like, yeah, I believe in God, and it turns out that God, what I mean by God is just a turtle that lives in my backyard, like something's gone terribly wrong. In the same way, if I tell you that like I believe in folk psychology, you might ask, okay, I'm on board with that. I understand we explain things in terms of beliefs and desires, but like, what does it mean to believe in desires? And in the God case, the reason why this seems so crazy to say that, yes, I'm a true believer, I believe in God, and then I point to an ordinary turtle, you're just going to be like, well, that's, you don't understand what God means. So the question you can always ask is like, are we sure this person has something in mind that they mean? So in the same way, if in the case of like being a believer in a higher power or being a believer in God, we have an understanding of God such that certain things count as God, and other things, even if we call them God, like a turtle is not a God. Maybe you could kind of change it around. Like an ordinary turtle couldn't be a God. Now we could imagine a way in which we could change it so that a turtle could be God, like if a turtle were imbibed with the Holy Spirit of some greater power or something, then it might make sense. But there's certain things we agree count as being a God, and other things don't count. And if you believe in God, even if you call a turtle God, it's not God. In the same way, if you believe in folk psychology, what counts as believing in folk psychology? If you're like, if somebody comes along and is like, yeah, I agree with Fodor, folk psychology is real. I believe there are beliefs, and what beliefs are is they grow out of your back and allow you to fly. And you're like, no. Those aren't beliefs, those are wings. And you're like, no, those are beliefs. You're gonna be like, this person isn't, we're not talking the same game. We're not doing the same thing here. So the question is, if you're a psychologist who wants to take folk psychology seriously, you wanna say it's largely right, and it's a theory that we can start with and then build up the rest of psychology on top of. We believe there are beliefs. We believe there are desires. We believe that these play an important role. The question then is, well, what exactly does that entail? In the same way that if I tell you I believe in God, there's something that entails. It means that I believe in a higher power. I believe probably that this higher power is all-knowing, or at least knows a whole lot. I believe that there's no other higher beings other than that one higher being. All of this is contained within the idea of believing in God. So the question is, what's the parallel in the case of folk psychology? What is it to believe in folk psychology? And that's really what the rest of the article I want to talk about today is. So first off, rather than jumping into what Fodor's ideas were, if you think folk psychology works, so if you going around in your everyday life, I mean, like, we use it every day. If I ask you, why did you go to bed at this time? You are going to say something like, I felt like it, or I knew I had to wake up in the morning. Or I ask you, why didn't you show up for class? You're going to tell me, well, I forgot that we had class on Thursday, etc. We use it all the time. So if you take beliefs seriously, if you think they're real things, if you think desires are real things, in your head, what does that mean? There's not a right answer to this question. This is literally let's unpack what we're talking about in our everyday minds together. So if I tell you, or when you say he believed it, what sort of thing do you mean? Or she believed it, or they believed it, or the cat believed the ball was behind the couch. What is it that you're trying to say when you say that? Because we all say it, we all understand it, but let's unpack. What exactly are we trying to say? And if you're having trouble with this, that means you're thinking about it hard. So Alan says, beliefs are when you try to reason why to do something. So yeah, there's this here's some key things. There's why, there's reasoning, and then there's do. So all of these are the key words that I'm pulling out of this. And that's a really good one. When you're thinking about like what a belief is, it's a reason why to do something. There's something about the way we ordinarily understand our mental states is that they give us reasons for things and they somehow cause us to do things. And these reasons, there's somehow both an explanation of what we're doing, but also why we do it. Like if I tell you that I went to the store, it seems like there's going to be a reason why I did that. And it's going to be why is going to be tied in with something about my beliefs and what I wanted at that moment. What are some other things that we can say about our ordinary?
You're trying to convince somebody that you think they are right. X, Y, and Z is the reason why I'm right.
Right. This is a key one. There's reasons why things are right or why they're wrong. There's an element with beliefs in which there's a rightness or a wrongness about them. Beliefs aren't just like, this marker is not right or wrong. This marker is just a marker. But my belief that this is a marker can be right or wrong. So there's something here tied in with right or wrong. And not only is there a right or wrong, there's a reasons that I'm right. So it's not just that I have this belief that this marker is black. There's also, I can try to convince you that this marker is black in some way. Or you could try to convince me that it's not black and that I'm colorblind or something along those lines. Anything else? And just to be clear, what I'm basically doing here, all of these stuff. Oh, I'm blurred. Are we back? This is the problem with a motion sensing camera.
No, it's still blurry.
God
Yeah,
damn
it's just
it.
blurry.
All right, let's fiddle around with this. Come on. This was supposed to be the one that was very good at focusing on its own. Still blurry?
Yeah.
Let's try this. Come on.
It's better now.
Okay, perfect. So I just have to stay near the board or else it focuses on me too close. All right, so this is what it says. Reasons why. It's tied in with doing things. There's a sense in which your beliefs can be right or wrong, and there's ways of proving that they're right or wrong. So I was definitely one of those little kids who didn't know how to say R's and definitely said aw, and so every once in a while it still comes out, kind of like perfect. So these are just the things that in our everyday life we think of. And then what Fodor's going to basically do is give big, fancy philosophical labels to all these sorts of ideas we're talking about right now. Any others that people want to throw up here? If not, that's totally fine. I just wanted to kind of get us in the zone of what on earth we're talking about. So Fodor breaks all this stuff down into 3 parts. And these, again, are just his big, fancy ways of describing essentially what we're talking about in here. And you are all, like, everything that you said here is going to tie into one of his big, fancier terms. It's just because he uses them, and they were in the writing, and it's organized. It's easier to organize if we have these terms. I'm just going to put them up here. 1, semantically two. His second one is have causal power. And then 3 is he either says certain generalizations, ordinary generalizations hold true, but I like his other thing he says where nothing crazy. So I'm going to put up these labels and now we can explain what they are. But basically what they are is his fancy way of describing some of the elements over here. So anyone remember from that little bonus lecture I gave on language, what semantic means or what semantically means? Any takers? Any memory? So it has to do with language, but which aspect of language? So in language, there's a whole bunch of different categories. One of them is syntax. One of them is semantics. Then there are a few others. But the way to think about semantics is just like the meaningfulness or the aboutness. So syntax was about how the words fit together. So yeah, K-Wayne, yes, it's what, in the case of language, it's what each individual word means or what it is that that word picks out. In this case, what Fodor wants to say is that in the same way, our beliefs are about things. To believe in ordinary common sense psychology is to believe that there are things your mental states like beliefs and desires are about. So it's not just like, you can't just have a belief. Like, I can't just believe. I have to believe in something. So this is the first thing. And even if you have somebody who says, yes, I believe, like if you're in a church and somebody asks like, do you believe? And you say, yes, I believe. You may not say it out loud, but what are you saying you believe in? You're saying you believe in God or a higher being, or that Jesus Christ died if it's a church, or that if you're in a mosque that Muhammad is the final prophet and all those sorts of things. So all he means by semantically valuable is that there's something for it to be about, and also something that makes it the case that it's right or wrong. So here's the thing. Here's the belief I have. Kanye West is going to win the 2020 presidential election. I believe that. What is your response to what I just said? There's many different responses, but give me some of them.
I don't believe so.
I don't believe so. So we've got maybe. I don't believe that. What are some more things you might tell me?
You're serious?
Is that a question? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you? I'm gonna add a little addition. Are you effing serious? What's the last? What are some more?
Could probably ask, why do you think so?
Yeah, why do you think so? I mean, straight up, the simplest one, and it's kind of in the background of a lot of these, is just like, no, he's not, you idiot. So if you say no, he's not, in the sense there's like, I could be right. This is why there's a maybe. Maybe he could win. Most of us do not believe he's going to win. Let's say I do genuinely believe, though. At the end of the day, who determines whether I'm right or not? What determines whether Kanye West wins the election? What is it that makes it the case that I had a good belief or a bad belief? This is one of those questions that's almost so obvious that it's tough to even recognize what the question is. Just
If he wins,
Yeah, if he wins, whether there's a real live man, Kanye West, who out there in the world goes and gets more votes than either Donald Trump or Joe Biden and then is elected president of the United States. It's nothing about what's going on in my head, it seems like. It seems like what makes it the case that if my belief that Kanye West is going to win the election, for it to be a good belief, or for, to use these terms, for it to be true, is for Kanye West, the actual person who I am actually thinking about, to actually win the election. And so this is all that FODR means by semantically evaluable. For belief or desire, when you believe in belief-desire psychology, what you're accepting is that inside your head are these things. You've got a belief. And let's say this one is that Kanye wins the election. And then this sort of thing is something that's going to be true or false. It can be right or wrong. And what's going to determine whether Kanye, so this is my head. What's going to actually determine whether this belief is a good one or bad one? It's nothing about what's going on in my head. It's rather what ends up happening out here in the world with the voting. Kanye West, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. What determines whether my belief is right or wrong is that out in the world, more people check one of these two boxes than check that box. So that's what he means by this. So to believe in ordinary folk psychology or common sense psychology is to believe that the things we think are about things beyond us. That it's not just, we're not locked inside of a box where all we're capable of thinking about are our other thoughts. It's rather that there's a world out there and we have beliefs and desires, and something about those things determines whether what's going on in here is good or not. So this is talking about beliefs, but you can think about it in the same way as desires, or with desires. So desires aren't true or false. What are desires? If I tell you I have a desire to eat a sandwich, what about the world has to happen to, you know, make my desire happy? I guess is another way of putting it. Because it doesn't make sense to say desires are true or false. We instead say, you know, they're fulfilled or unfulfilled. So what does it take to fulfill a desire? Well, in the same way, it's just to have the desire itself, something about the world, interact with the desire in the way that allows it to be fulfilled. So does everyone understand, just generally, like this should sound like ordinary common sense stuff, but it's actually pretty interesting and profound of what is going on, because in a lot of ways, this is going to raise many, many, many questions. And we're going to talk about those in a minute, but does everyone understand just generally the first thing is just that to think that folk psychology or common sense psychology is true is just to think that something about your mental life is about something non-mental. And that there's things that happen in the non-mental world affect what is and determine whether the things in your head are true or false, satisfied or unsatisfied. So is everyone on board with just this general picture? In some ways, it's, you know, it's common sense. But in other ways, as we'll see, it's going to bring up a lot of interesting, complex questions. We okay for now? I can move on to part 2 of this part 1, right? Are we good? We good? All right. So we now know it's semantically evaluable, and we said it's something about the world. What is it? So we know it's something about the external world that determines whether my belief that Kanye West is going to win the election ends up being true or false. So a question that comes up here, and the sort of question that only a philosopher could ask, is why is it the case that my belief that Kanye West is going to win the election is not, like, what is it that determines my belief has that content, is a way of putting it. Why is it that my belief that Kanye West is going to win the election, its truth rests on the behaviors of Kanye West, not like the behaviors of my dog, or whether the moon is round. How do we explain the fact that this is what's going on? Why is it that my belief about Kanye West lines up with facts about Kanye West? Well, according to Fodor, what it is another side of this about common sense psychology is that beliefs and desires and things like that, they're not just semantically evaluable. They're semantically evaluable. They're capable of being true or false, or being satisfied or unsatisfied, because they're things with contents. And those contents are what determine whether something is true or false. So you can think of it this way. I'm going to write out an English sentence. I believe that the earth is round. Or I guess a better way of doing this is I believe the earth is mostly, it is round, though not a perfect sphere. All right, this is a belief I have. This one's true, unlike the one that I think Kanye is going to win the election. What determines whether my belief is right or not? What is it? So first off, how many of us think this is true? How many people believe the earth is round?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Most of us do. If you don't, I'm sorry, the earth is round. I'm sorry to pop your bubble, but yeah, the earth is round. So in this case, you can observe it to be true, or more importantly, just that it is true. And so the way you think of it is that to believe that the earth is round, is you have something, a belief, and then you have a mental content or something inside your head that the earth is round. And so here's one of the things about belief, desire, psychology. It's whatever this content is, whatever this thing that you believe determines whether the belief as a whole is true or false. So whether I believe that the earth is round comes down to the content that the earth is round that I believe. So in this sense, there's to believe ordinary folk psychology, you have to believe there are mental contents, whatever that means, or things that are evaluable. To be in a true belief is to have this belief that the earth is round. Or to be a true belief, to have the belief, and for the belief to be true, is to have the belief that has the content the earth is round, and for that content to in some sense match up with reality. So is everyone on board with this? Now this should sound like ordinary common sense, because it's what we assume every day. It's just unpacking. Now why are we unpacking this? Let's just highlight here, why are we wasting our time talking about this? Well, it raises a lot of really interesting, important questions. So what's a question you might have at this point? We've said that to believe something is to believe that it's true that the earth is round. And if it's a true belief, then the earth really is round. And if it's not a true belief, then the earth isn't really round. What is an obvious, or what is a really fundamental question that might come up at this point? So one question you might have is, how would you go about proving that the earth is round? So if you believe this, you can't just take it at ground level. Another thing you're going to want to do is, how do you even go about proving the earth is round? But even more fundamentally than that, let's get down to the bare bones. So Ray says you can't believe it without knowing it. And it seems like there's some connection here with believing and knowing. And so all of you in the chat are raising some really, really great, interesting questions. These are all really interesting, substantive questions that are actually, they're asking things a little bit above. I'm asking the dumbest possible question, or the barest bones sort of question. You are all asking all sorts of other super interesting questions that deserve my attention, but we're short on time. And we're going to come back to these more and more as the the semester goes on. But the one I'm looking for is just like, at the bare bones, my beliefs, where are they? Where do they exist? What are they?
In your mind.
They're in my mind. Where's the earth?
We're on it.
Yeah, we're on. The earth is not in my mind. The earth is out there. My mind is in here. How on earth can something in my mind be about something that's not in my mind? Like, what does that even mean? So to even talk about believing the earth is round, you immediately have some tough questions that come up. Like, what is it for something mental to be about something not mental? When I believe that the earth is round, am I believing about like the earth as it is? What if the earth gets split in half? Then am I believing, is my belief still about both halves? There are all these tough questions that arise very quickly. And they only really come to the surface when you recognize exactly what it is that your belief in folk psychology is causing you to have to like bring out to the surface. And so then once you have these sorts of questions of like, okay, let's accept that I have a belief about these things. Then this is where the psychology can kick in. Is if we take for granted that I have beliefs about things and that my beliefs represent things, we can now ask questions like, are my eyes sufficient for telling me that the earth is round? Or how is it that my eyes take the experience and put them into my head? Or if the earth is, like, if I believe the earth is round and science tells me it's round, what would happen if the earth wasn't round? Or are all beliefs things that you need evidence for? With a religious belief, can you just believe it for purely faith-based reasons? Does that make any sense? Does it even make sense to talk about believing things? So all of these are great questions to ask. And all of these are great psychological questions. But the first key is to even ask these questions, you have to accept that there are these things, beliefs, and that these things have certain contents. And that these contents are determined by whatever, there's something about the world and its relationship to what's going on in my head that makes it the case that I have a belief that the earth is round. I don't quite know what it is, but until we frame it in this way, we're not even asking the right question. So that's the first thing that Fodor says. Does everyone understand? This is almost just stripping down to the basic level. If you believe that our ordinary way of getting around in the world and understanding people is true, then you've already accepted there's something about the human mind which allows it to have thoughts about things outside of itself. And not only that, to make it the case that I have a particular thought that the earth is round. And that's a different thought from my thought that Kanye West is going to win the election. And yet there's something about some part of the world that somehow affects my mind in a way to make it the case that I have both these beliefs. And whether these beliefs are true or not are going to come down to, one, what's in there, what the content is, and two, how I relate and how I mentally relate to that world, which is the thing that makes it the case that this is true or false. And we're going to be talking about this for the rest of the semester, but this is basically just putting in fancy philosophy terms, stuff that we take for granted every day, and pausing and being, wait a second, what happens if we actually stop and think about these things? And this is what I said early on in the class. With philosophy, it's in a lot of ways, it's like putting on our baby hats again. We're asking the questions that nobody asks after the age of 6. When you were 6, you wanted to know why. Then at some point you realized you had better things to do. Well, now I'm going to bring you back and we're going to pretend we're 6 again. And one of the first things we can talk about is, well, what does it take to believe something? Well, it's to stand in some sort of relationship to a mental content that is somehow true or false based on what's happening in the real world. So that's the first part of it. The second thing, Fodor says that beliefs and desires and all these common sense things, they don't just like exist out there, they have causal powers. That's the second thing a commitment to folk psychology is a commitment to. Not only that these things exist, but that they have causal power. Now, what on earth do we mean by causal power? Well, let's go. What's the key word in causal power? What's the key word in causal? What's the hiding word behind it?
Cause.
Yeah, cause. That was a terrible way of asking that question. I'm glad somebody got there. I'm glad a few of you did. So yeah, what the hell is a cause? This is another one of those things in which we take it for granted so much that it's really tough to give a definition of it, but we can kind of work with it. So when you say one thing caused another, what do you mean? And I don't need a perfect definition, just ordinarily, like, what sort of thing would you be trying to express to me?
This one event or this one action led to another event or action.
Yeah, so it seems like there's two parts. One of them is that Ray got in here first. I'm going to say his first. One thing follows another, and specifically follows another in time. So as one thing happens before another thing, there's a sequence here. And then it's not just that there's a sequence, but rather that one thing led or in some way is directly responsible for, or if another way of putting it is, if the first one didn't happen, the second one wouldn't have happened. So if I stab myself in the leg and it starts bleeding everywhere and I go to the doctor and they're like, what caused this? I'm going to be like, I stabbed myself in the leg. And when I say that, I mean, one, first was the action of stabbing, and then was the action of bleeding everywhere. And not only that, something about the knife. If I hadn't done this, I wouldn't have been bleeding everywhere. So there's something about it. So in the same way, what Fodor says is, and then a way of putting this is that like, my stabbing had causal power. It had the power to cause me to bleed. Or in this way, this little, the little flip thing that's on my camera has the power to make you all not be able to see me anymore. That's its causal power. In the same way, beliefs, desires, that sort of stuff has causal power. And he says it specifically has three different aspects of causal power. So what are the three things or causal chains? Another way of thinking of causes is they generally exist in chains. So you can think of it in terms of dominoes. This domino caused this domino to fall, which caused this domino to fall, which caused this domino to fall. So in the same way, beliefs, desires, that sort of stuff can fit into these causal chains. And there's three different types of links in the chain that Fodor says are crucial. And if you believe in folk psychology or common sense psychology, you believe that mental states or mental things like beliefs and desires, the mental, just mental stuff can be a part of three different types of links. What are the three links? Any takers? I can also reason these out. All right, so what word is this?
Hi.
Hi, it's the word hi. What made you know that this was the word hi?
Because I've seen it before and I understand the concept behind it.
Yeah, you saw it. So you came to believe that this is the word hi. And what caused you to have that belief? Your eyes. It was something, specifically, there was something happening in the external world that had a causal effect on what's going on in your head. Here's another one. Everyone take your hand, put it in a ball, and start punching yourself on the leg. Just punch yourself on the leg. You feel that feeling as it hits your leg? Yeah, that is you now feel that pressure, and you have a belief that there's pressure on your leg when you punch it. That right there is the first type of link. It's the world, the external world can causally affect the mind. Now, external world causally affects the mind. Here's another one. How many of you are holding a writing utensil right now? Pick it up and just like kind of toss it in your hand or drop it. If you're in front of your computer, you can just lift your computer up. Anything like this. What just happened? Describe things from the computer or the pencil's perspective. Imagine you were the computer or pencil. What just happened?
It fell onto the computer.
It fell, or first off, it was lifted up, it moved, and what caused that movement to happen?
Gravity.
Gravity, but before gravity, for it to get up, before it could fall, what caused it to go upwards?
Myself.
Yeah, you did. Something about, I said, wherever I am, and you, wherever you are, made some sounds, that got into your head. You then formed the belief, I should move my pencil. So here's the second type of cause. It's not just that the external world causes you have the beliefs. It's that your beliefs, desires, and things can causally impact the external world. Specifically through, it can cause you to move your hands, and your hands can then move things. So when you believe in folk psychology or common sense psychology, it's not just like you have beliefs that exist in a vacuum. It's that they can be caused by things and they can do things. So the second one is, I'm going to put this mental, or I guess world can causally affect mind. Mind can causally affect world. And then what's the third type? If these are the first two, world affecting mind, mind affecting world, what's the third? All right, here's a question. Actually, I have a good example one here. Let me pull it up. All right. Here's something I'm going to tell you. Oh yeah, Ray's got it. It's mind affecting mind. The third one is mental affecting mental, or mind can cause mind. So mind can causally affect other parts of the mind. So what's the classic case of this? What's a classic case of, and in each of these cases, I'm talking about individual beliefs. So the world can causally affect an individual belief to happen. An individual belief, like I should punch myself in the leg right now, can cause the world to be such that like my leg is getting punched. And then finally, we can have one belief or one desire causing another one. Ray's got a good one. Pain can cause sadness. What is pain? It's something mental, but it can cause another thing, the sadness that follows it. Or another one along this line, just like thinking back, reminiscing, thinking of a memory can cause sadness or pain or discomfort. So these are cases in which one part of the mind is causing another part of the mind. Another one is if I told you my dog can fly, and I swore my dog can fly, how many of you would believe me? And how many would conclude I'm lying? Good, Eddie. Yeah. How many of you would believe me if I told you my dog can fly? Raise your hand if you, no, nobody's going to believe me. Explain to me how you reached that conclusion.
Well, I've seen a lot of dogs in my life and none of them have flown.
Yeah, so you go into your mind and you think back to all the different, so there are a few different ways you might do this. You might think to yourself, I'm going to think back, and you go to your memories. And you use those memories and you compare your memories to this current state, namely that I claim I have a dog that can fly. And you're going to say, well, my memories don't line up with this, so I'm going to reject this. This is a case in which one mental state combines with another mental state and leads causally to you're rejecting the belief that my dog can fly. Or another one, you might just start with the claim like dogs cannot fly. Like it's a fact of the matter. Birds can fly, bats can fly, dogs cannot. If I tell you my dog is a dog, then you know that my dog is not the sort of thing that can fly. Again, it's these causal, my mind, I reach this additional conclusion because it's caused by what else is happening. I have some memories, I combine them with what I hear, and those two together cause me to form the belief that my professor's full of crap. He's lying. So that's what we mean by the mind causing mind case. So Fodor says that what it is to accept folk psychology is first you accept that there are these things that have contents. I believe that the earth is round. And not only that, these things can causally interact with other things. So first, they can causally be, the world can cause them to come into existence. Another thing is they can cause things to happen in the world. So my belief that, another one, my belief that Joe Biden is a better president, would make a better president than Donald Trump is going to cause me to fill out a ballot in a certain way. If I believe that Kanye West is going to become president, I might flee the country. These are ways in which my beliefs are going to affect the world. And then finally, one belief or one desire can affect other ones. So another case, if I believe that I'm hungry, then I'm going to form a desire to have food. If I believe that I have only $10 in my pocket, I'm not going to form the intention to buy a car. All of these are the ways that they tie together. So this is almost so obviously common sense that it's like, why are we spending time talking about this? Well, it's because in this case, in the first one, there was this interesting thing about, well, if we're talking in terms of contents, an obvious question is, well, where the hell does this come from? In this case, it's more an observation that Fodor makes, which is that it's not simply that these things have causes or that one thing in the mind can cause another thing in the mind. The interesting thing is that when one thing causes something else in the mind, it seems to follow along with these ordinary rules of rationality and how we think. And a very interesting fact is simply telling you how I got to a conclusion causally very often gives you a reason to believe that my belief is true. So like if I tell you, first I lifted my arm and then I let go of my arm, like that doesn't give you a reason to lift your arm and lower your arm. Or if I tell you I don't know, if I tell you it's hot in here, like that doesn't give you a reason. But if I'm trying to answer a particular question, my way of reaching a certain conclusion might at the same time provide you with a reason to reach that conclusion because you recognize something about the way these beliefs cause each other is something which you can accept as giving you good reason to do it. So let me think if I can come up with a good one here. If I tell you, see, what can I think of let me think of an obscure animal. Kiwi birds. Does anyone know what a kiwi? No, that's not going to work. Let's go with a, how many people, let's just go for it. How many people have heard of this animal before? Dik-dik. D-I-K, D-I-K. How many people have heard of this animal? So you know nothing about what it looks like. I'm going, pardon?
I have not heard of it.
You have?
No.
Okay, so most of you, maybe there's somebody who's heard of this animal. I'll show you a picture of it afterwards, but this is an actual animal. Here's a question I have for you. Does this animal have fur? Let me explain to you my way of reaching the conclusion that this animal has fur. One, dik-diks are mammals. Two, all mammals have fur. Conclusion, what do we conclude? Do they have fur?
The dik-diks have fur.
Yeah. Dik-diks have fur. So yes, this is a way. Now, do you follow along with my line of reasoning? Like if I explain this to you and you know this one, do you believe that dik-diks have fur? It looks like my explaining how I got here gives you a reason to draw this conclusion. Now let me pull up one of these cute little guys. They're very adorable and much cuter than whatever's going on in all your minds right now. They're the world's smallest antelopes. They're really cute. Let me pull one up. Come on, this little guy. No, get on the full screen. Open link in new tab. No, open image in new tab. Open image in new tab. There we go. Look at the little guy. See, just like a tiny little antelope. He's got a funny, is it the right size? Yeah, see, it's just like a cute little antelope. They're very small. Let me pull up another one. Dik-dik. They're like miniature. Here's one with a person. This is some nice person. Evidently a baby one was born at this zoo website I'm currently at. Where are you? See, that's one with a person's hand next to it. They're very, very little. So now you know what a dik-dik looks like. So now you could there's another one. There's a person next to it. They're very, very little and cute. So that's what, that's now you can form new beliefs about dicks. And I could, that you couldn't have formed before. But in this way, you didn't know what they look like. You didn't know whether they had fur. But I could explain to you my way of coming to the conclusion that, yes, they had to have fur. And therefore, if you accept these things, you also have a reason to believe that these little antelopes have fur. You didn't even know it was an antelope. Now you kind of know it is because you've seen what it looks like. So yes, this is Fodor's other point. It's not just that these things cause each other. It's rather that the way the mind causes other things in the mind seems in some sense very much tied into the way that you prove things to be true. There's some connection here between the causal effects of our mind on other parts of our mind, and there's a similarity between those causes and these things, about what's rational and what's good ways of thinking and what it is to think well and what it is to prove something. Like if you're doing a math proof and this plus this proves this, that bears a lot of similarity to the way we think through our heads. Sometimes it's just temporal, but very often you literally do things like I'm trying to decide who to vote for. First, I think of things that matter to me. I believe that people of all races are equal. I also know that one presidential candidate believes this more than another presidential candidate. Therefore, from there, I came to the conclusion I should believe in this, or I should vote for this presidential candidate. So the idea that Fodor has with number 2 is that things in the mind, if you believe folk psychology, you accept that things in the mind influence other things in the mind in a way that seems very closely related to the way that you prove truths and falsehoods in science. So that's, or I mean, not in science, but in everything, everyday life. It looks like the mind, to accept folk psychology, it's not just that you believe they cause each other, it's that they cause each other in something like a rational way, or that rationality is built into the human mind. And this is something we're going to come back to again and again and again. And this is what especially people are going to then point to cases in which it doesn't seem like this is necessarily true. So those are the first 2 things that Fodor says. If you believe in common sense psychology, you believe that we have these things, mental states, and they have contents, and whatever contents they have determine what about the world it takes to make them true. And second, you believe that these things can cause the world to change, can be caused by the world, and can affect each other. And then his third one, and this is just the it's not crazy stipulation. So this is just, so in the same way, it can't go against common sense understandings to such a degree that it feels like we've lost sight of what we were talking about originally. So this is basically a parallel argument to my argument that believing that there's a turtle in your backyard that you call God is not proof that you believe in God. In the same way, if you start drawing crazy conclusions about what a belief is and what a desire is, then you're no longer accepting common sense psychology. You have to accept some of the basic, to count as someone who believes in common sense psychology, you still have to accept certain ordinary things, like beliefs and desires work together in certain ways. Like if you have a belief that something's going to happen and a desire to make it happen, then if you put the 2 of them together and you don't add in any external circumstances, you're going to form the intention to do it. So if I believe that I'm hungry or I desire a sandwich and I believe that the store has a sandwich, I'm going to form the intention to go get a sandwich in other cases. So this is a great question, Ray. Ray asked, what are, these are the 3 definitions of folk psychology. It's not really so much the best way of thinking of this is Fodor stipulates, he just decides, we don't have a very good definition of folk psychology, so I'm just going to say when I mean folk psychology, this is what I mean by it, and I think this is what everyone else means by it too, closely enough, such that if you defend something, if you go forward into actual psychological science, and you accept that the mind represents the world and has mental contents that correspond to things in the world, and you believe that these mental states causally affect and are causally affected by each other and the world, and you're not saying anything that totally goes against common sense, even if you change things around the edges, you're still going to count as a common sense psychologist. You're going to count as someone who believes in folk psychology. So things he points to, he says, to believe in folk psychology, you don't have to believe every single thing we usually accept about how humans think. So for instance, for most of human history, people thought that everything that happened in the mind happened consciously. If you thought it to yourself consciously, it was real, it happened. If you didn't think it out loud to yourself, that wasn't real. That wasn't part of the mind. The mind was only what happened at the conscious level. Then who came along and said, no, there's a lot of unconscious stuff. This is just a psych. Yeah, Freud was the first one. Freud was the first one to say, wait, actually the mind, most of what it does is under the surface. And while many of Freud's particular questions or particular views on how the subconscious worked and how the unconscious worked have, yeah, I'll give you 1 second, Ray, of something crazy. While Freud says that his particulars are gone, most psychologists today accept that there's a lot of processing that happens unconsciously. So according to Fodor, the fact that there's unconscious processing, you can still be you can count as someone who accepts folk psychology, even if you accept their unconscious beliefs, unconscious desires, and unconscious processing. Now, something you couldn't believe is that if you have a belief that something is true, you're going to be a belief is to then suddenly feel a terrible negative feeling in your shoulder. So if I believe that the sky is blue, to have that belief is to suddenly have a pain in my shoulder. Like, that's not what folk psychology doesn't say, that beliefs cause pain. If it's a painful belief, you can't just like stick things together. Or another thing is ordinary folk psychology, like if you see a cat, it's going to make you believe that there's a cat. Something crazy would be to say, if you see a cat, you automatically stab yourself 17 times. Like, if your theory says that's what a belief is, then you're no longer doing folk psychology. Or if you're somebody who says every single thought you have, there is no external world, you exist in a vacuum, everything in your head is a figment of your own imagination. There's no way for the world to connect with what's in your mind, it's all an illusion. That would be something where Fodor might say, you're no longer doing folk psychology. If you say that what makes your mind correct is other things in your mind, you're not doing full-on folk psychology anymore. So these are the sorts of things. It's just, you have to, when somebody comes back and looks at it, you have to look similar enough to folk psychology and the ordinary things we say in order to count as folk psychology. So let me just summarize. Are people generally on board with this? In some ways, this is the most obvious class we'll have this semester, because all of this is just common sense. It's taking common sense and writing it out on a board. But on the other side, it's really important, because it's only by recognizing things that are in the common sense that you can recognize how powerful a certain view is. Like, it's a really substantive claim that there are things, mental contents. Like, we know there are brains. We know there's like pieces of meat. If you cut open your head, you get a piece of meat. But to say that there's a mental content is to say something pretty crazy. It's to say that something about that piece of meat makes it so that parts of what are happening in that meat piece are in some sense about a world and can be true or false based on what's happening outside in a world. Like, that is a really crazy strong claim. Like, your meathead, like you're a big piece of meat, and yet you have thoughts about other things. Like, you can have a belief about Kanye West, but really, like, what is that? That's kind of a profound, crazy claim. It's so obvious to us that we have thoughts about things that we very rarely pause to go, that's really pretty incredible that my hunk of head meat is able to do this. And that not only that, my hunk of head meat is able to do it in a way that's similar enough to what your hunk of head meat is doing, that we can all talk and communicate. And like, we can all have the same belief that Kanye West is not going to win the election. Like, that is a pretty remarkable, if you pause and think about it, I'm going to assume none of us have ever met Kanye West personally. No one's met Kanye personally, have they? Like when nobody's, yeah. So it's crazy that, like we're all able to have these thoughts. So the fact that we are all able to agree and think about things in this way is built into folk psychology, and it's really quite a powerful theory. So once it's laid out, though, in this sort of way, you can begin to ask questions about, like, you know, well, how does a mental state represent something? Or how is it that the mind, what is it for the mind to have a mental content? How is it that our brain is able to represent things about the world? How is it that we're able to find out whether our beliefs are true or not? If we're already in the mental world, how do we then go and make sure there's something else in the mental world? So these are the sorts of questions that come up once you start taking common sense psychology seriously. And so if you know that it's about, you're committed to causal effects. Another thing is, like, how can the world affect what's happening in the mind? Like, how is it that what's happening, like, it's pretty amazing that I go like this and now you have, you know, I literally can control your mind through this camera. That's pretty impressive. I can control what you're going to think about, you know. This is the famous don't think about a pink elephant. Well, now what are we all doing? We're all thinking about pink elephants. And why? Because I'm able to, something about this is able to do this. And if we want to understand how this magic happens, we first have to frame it in the right way. And that's what Fodor's saying, is we start with folk psychology. And this is what it means to start with folk psychology. You accept that things are causally determined. The mind and the world causally interact. And you accept that whatever it is to have a belief, it's the sort of thing that can be true and false. And it's true and false because it has a certain content. That's what we're going to build on for, like, the rest of the semesters. Once you've accepted this, one question is, how is it implemented? What does it look like? And that's what we're going to talk about next class with Fodor's language of thought and representational theory of mind. Yeah, so Ray is right. I think crazy is a folk psychology term. And yeah, so Ray has pointed out that my way of pointing out nothing crazy is a very, this is not meant as a technical definition here, Ray. Thank you for bringing this up. So crazy is a folk psychology term. So therefore defining things in terms of it not being crazy is a circular definition, which is problematic. But Fodor's technical definition is that for it to count as folk psychology, a large number of the generalizations which are made in ordinary belief, desire psychology hold true, and that nothing, why are we thinking? So this is another question. So Alan's question is, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Let me finish this one and then I'm gonna respond to your question, Alan, because it's an excellent one. So for Fodor, the idea is that for it to count as folk psychology, at least a good number of the things that you usually accept about the way the mind works have to hold true. Like if you say that if you see something, it doesn't affect your beliefs. Like if you come to the conclusion that having an experience on your eyeballs in no way affects what your beliefs about what you see, you can't throw that out, because built into the very foundation of our folk psychology is this idea that what we see, the senses impact the system in some other way. So Fodor says you have to keep around enough of those general, everyday, common sense generalizations. So it's not crazy is my quick way of saying that a certain high percentage of the generalizations have to hold true. Now, Alan asked a great question of, is there an explanation for why we think what we think at a certain time? Which is, why is it that if something hasn't come up, if I don't say pink elephants, why is it that you might independently of me have gone off thinking? Now, that is a great psychological question and a really fundamental one. And one of the things I think to say at this point is that is a question that I don't know if there's a good answer to yet. But to ask that question is to engage in things in a folk psychology way. It's to accept that we have trains of thought which seem to be caused by other trains of thought, but sometimes they don't seem to always be caused by other things. sometimes it seems like we just have thoughts that percolate up. How does that happen? Well, it seems like we want to say that maybe they were caused, maybe it was an accident, but until you accept that beliefs and desires are the things that can be caused by other ones, you're not even going to be able to ask the question, why is it that this happened? Is there a cause? If you deny the causal connection of thoughts with other thoughts, you're not even going to be asking the right questions. So what I'm going to do next time is I'm just going to summarize this, and then we'll jump into Fodor's particular way of explaining how this is possible. And the background is basically, he says, the best way to understand a human mind is to think of it like a computer. And we just have a mind which has things written out in a certain sort of code in the same way that a computer has something written out in a code. And to believe or desire is just to have a line of that code in this software which the brain is running operative in that time. If that didn't make sense here at the end, don't worry, we're going to talk about it a lot more next time. But for now, that's all I wanted to say this week. We're out of time. If you want to shoot me an email with any questions, feel free. Sorry, I didn't have any time here at the end to answer any more. Have a great week every weekend, and I'll see everyone on Tuesday.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Professor.
You too.